The events 3, 2, 1.
Perfect. Hello, and welcome back to the M365 Government of Canada Council meetings. We have had a little bit of a technical issue this afternoon letting everyone in, so I'm just going to give everyone another minute or so in silence for people to kind of filter in, and then we'll get started. If it does look a little bit different for you today, it is because of the way that Teams Live was set up for today. You're still going to get the same content. The interface might just look a little bit different. We'll just give everyone another minute or so to join in, and then we will get started. There we go. For those of you just joining now, we're just giving everyone an extra minute this time around to join. We did have a little bit of a tech hurdle joining into the session today, so just making sure everyone gets in and settled so we don't miss any of Paul and Danielle's presentation. I'm hearing from the inside that it's looking normal, so I think we might as well get started as everyone filters in here. So I am Sylvana Gatto, Sales Director with Orangutech. Welcome back to our 4th season of the M365 Government of Canada Council meeting. I hope everyone enjoyed the remainder of your summer. I know typically we take off July and August, but we did have a bonus session that took place in July with IRB. And it was honestly one of the most highly attended presentations, which was surprising for a July event. But I think it just rolled really well for us into the summer and is kicking us off really nicely for our session today. It wouldn't be a new season if we weren't starting with an update from Treasury Board. We're anticipating a really great turnout for our session today. I know there's been a lot of buzz going on at a lot of different departments. I'm really excited to hear about what Treasury Board has been up to and look forward to the updates. I believe the last update that Treasury Board gave to the council meeting was last December. So it's been a little bit. I know that Danielle was letting us know that the strategy is the same, but definitely a lot of updates over the last several months. So if you have joined in the past, you'll know that the updates have been from Joel Martin, Chief IM Officer over at Treasury Board. Today we have CIO of Treasury Board, Paul Girard, presenting, as well as Senior Director of Client Services, Danielle Morneau, sorry. Next slide, Danielle. Thank you. See if it clicks here. Perfect. All right, so I know a lot of you who are joining in today have been with us for a long time. We started back in June of 2018 with our first council meeting, and it has grown significantly ever since. We used to host it in a small boardroom, then it moved to the Microsoft office, and as soon as the pandemic hit, we moved it online, and our attendance has been higher than it's ever been, and we're expecting another great season. So thank you so much for those of you who continue to join month after month, season after season. But I do know there was a lot of new names added by your peers to the list this summer. So anyone that has not joined an M365 council meeting before, welcome. It's great to have you. Every month we have a different department present on their journey to M365. And I'll get you to change the slide, Danielle, to the next slide. And when it first started, we had a lot of departments presenting on what their roadmaps were going to look like, what their plans to move to M365 were going to look like before it was a big thing, before it was the thing that all departments were doing. And then we started discussing implementations. We started discussing specifics like security and change management, implementations, lessons learned, and every time a department comes on, they kind of take a different twist to what they present to the peers, and it always turns out to be a great presentation, and some of the best parts are the questions that come at the end. We'll get you to go to the next slide, Danielle. So before I hand things off to Paul and Danielle, I will remind you this is a Teams live event. As I said at the beginning, for any of you that missed it, the interface may look a little bit different for you today. You still should be able to put your questions in the question box. You'll see on the top of your Teams bar. Ask your questions, please. Associate your name with your questions because anonymous questions may or may not get answered. If you see a question in the chat that you would have asked or you have interest in, you have the ability to like it, and those ones kind of get brought to the top of the question bar. So definitely feel free to do that as well. I know Danielle said the presentation is about 30 minutes long, so that will leave us plenty of time at the end to go through questions. So without further ado, I will pass things over to CIO of Treasury Board, Paul Girard, to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Selena. Great introduction, really appreciate it. Danielle's going to be doing most of the heavy lifting on this and will do a phenomenal job. But I thought, it's important for me to, number one, show up, and number two, maybe give a little bit of context setting over and above M365. So as maybe some of you, maybe most of you are aware, our modernization effort started probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And whenever the then CIO for the Government of Canada said, cloud first, and that should be our strategy, we took that very seriously, of course, being part of Treasury Board, and also trying to be a leader in terms of the adoption of cloud. So our cloud journey kind of started then with a whole whack of planning, and not only included M365, but also included moving our complete infrastructure from an old data center that was really being shut down into a fully cloud-enabled environment. So we are, and I'm proud to say, we are, I think, the only department to be 100% on cloud infrastructure as of January of last year, I think. So a lot of effort went into that, and I think it goes well beyond just being on cloud infrastructure. What we've layered on top is things like Agile, the way we manage our projects and hand in glove with our business partners, daily scrums, and incrementally roll out capability. And the fact that we fully adopted DevOps, we use Microsoft DevOps in this case to develop code, release it, test it, etc. Those three things combined, so cloud, DevOps, and Agile, once you've got them all in place, really work well together. As a matter of fact, we're working on a project right now. We were handed it about 4 weeks ago. Some of you may or may not be aware of it, but we had 4 weeks to understand requirements, design it, develop it, and test it, and roll it out broadly to the GC. Within a 4 to 5 week period, and the team really hit it out of the park. And if it wasn't for those kind of three fundamental foundational components, there is no way we could have done it. Now, over and above that, we also wanted to move forward with M365. We were on GC Docs, one of the early adopters of GC Docs. I think it was 2011, 2012, whenever we, again, decided to take TBS policy to heart and adopted very quickly. So we moved from ARTEMS to GC Docs at that point. However, with the licensing that we were offered through M365, it became apparent that having M365 SharePoint at our disposal and GC Docs as our document repository, having two systems and whatever you'd put in the middle to make sure that they're all kept in sync, having three technologies to do the same thing that we could do with one probably wasn't the right approach for us, because we're relatively small as an IT organization and as an organization in general. So we started looking at how can we fully adopt kind of the full M365 suite, all the way from email to Teams to SharePoint to all the other components that M365 has to offer. So it's been a real journey, and I know Danielle's going to go through that journey in terms of how we structured it and where we are. But so far it's gone really, really well, and the final stage is being put into place now in terms of full SharePoint adoption and the replacement ultimately of GC Docs. So maybe with that, Danielle, did I set enough context for you to kind of dive into the slide deck?
You did, Paul. Thank you. I'll apologize to everyone. I'm on country internet. All contingency plans have been exhausted. So if my video or audio start to cut out, I may turn off my video. But thank you for that kind introduction. I only joined Treasury Board in January, about 8 weeks before the pandemic. So a lot of what Paul was talking about was well in motion when I joined the team. And I'm excited to show you the status of where we are today. If I saw a number of familiar names, if you were at the IM Leaders presentation in January, some of this might be repetition for you, but it does go to show and reinforce that we haven't changed our strategy pretty much from the beginning. We've been staying the course. We've adjusted along the way, but and I can show you what some of those adjustments are. But it's a really good time to situate the community in terms of where we are, as well as I think next month we've been invited to speak at the IM Leaders panel, so we'll be able to give an update there as well, and additional questions if you don't get yours answered today. So I think Paul covered off the strategic context a great deal. It's available in the presentation if you're digging into it yourself for your departments, and I invite you to look at those documents in more detail. They're still relevant today. Et je voulais aussi demander si vous avez des questions en français, je suis capable de répondre. La présentation sera primairement en français, mais on a beaucoup des informations disponibles dans les deux langues si nécessaire. Alors, I'm not going to belabor this. I think Paul gave a really good overview on how we got to where we are. And I certainly don't want to correct my CIO. We were, in fact, had moved all of our applications, not without significant cleanup, to the cloud by January. Almost decommissioning almost half of the applications was done. But unfortunately, our full workload migration was delayed until June with the being the first partner from the DCC. Our Exchange Online wasn't fully migrated until June. It took several tries. And if you think back to June 2020 last year, that was an incredible achievement given COVID less than 6 weeks before. So this is really the third arm of a three-armed project. The WLM was to move our Exchange, our email, and all of our applications, or the WLM. The second piece was to upgrade our infrastructures and to, or not infrastructure, but the actual tools that we use in our tablets to Windows 10. Which continued throughout the pandemic, and the last 1,000 were actually rolled out remotely ahead of that June DCC move. And then finally now the digital workspace renewal. This is where there's significant engagement with sectors and stakeholders. So happy to show you a little bit more about that. This has been the governing principles behind the digital workspace renewal from the beginning. Classic Office suite with a whole lot of new tools along the way. And as you all know, it is quite the ecosystem that we manage, and that ecosystem is ever changing and evolving. I think yesterday alone, I heard of new features that we can expect coming soon, like being able to RSVP to a meeting in person or remotely. If you haven't heard, Microsoft announced that feature in development yesterday or this week. So our key business outcomes are almost all realized. We're pretty excited about that. Earlier this year in 2021, we are now able to do most things on our desktop on our mobile devices. So, you know, intuitive, except for Microsoft Live. We had some problems with that today, but the tools are a bit more intuitive. The real-time collaboration that they enable wouldn't have been possible. The project that Paul referred to just wouldn't have been possible without some of the collaboration on large documents that we've pulled off. So definitely reaping the benefits of that right now. Being able to work from anywhere, any device within a TBS device has been a game changer for me, certainly in the country. The accessibility features are improving every day, and quite remarkably, I've even used them myself at times to test out how my document reads with the screen reader. So putting accessibility not just in the hands of people who need it, but also the people designing content, which is fantastic. And the last kind of hill to climb, and we're still climbing, is that idea of fully integrated. We're using aspects of SharePoint, the back end of Teams, and a few pieces of it like SharePoint lists, but we haven't fully achieved that full integration as of yet. So a little refresher for those of you who've seen it already, we divided up our digital workspace renewal into kind of 3 big broad categories. In fact, 4, but 3 is what I'll talk about. And we ended up breaking up the middle one. You'll see the little plus there in recognition of what we did to advance teams for the BCP. So the first grouping was things around individual drafting, collaboration with small teams, centered around OneDrive, or the Microsoft technology around OneDrive. It was rolled out at the same time as Exchange Online, so that was our first rollout. And then the next piece was around Teams as a central focal point where you could define collaboration teams. We went, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but essentially we went out with basic teams, then we went out with functional teams according to our hierarchy. And then around Christmas time this year, we launched the ad hoc teams request. As of last count, we're at about 130 unique teams, be it temporary or enduring. And finally, SharePoint, which is the broad enterprise consumption and collaboration of information that'll be possible with SharePoint. So our rollout roadmap was significantly plan never survives contact. And so while we had this all nicely sketched out to happen within the year, COVID and other priorities have really forced the team to be quite adaptable. I'm very proud of them. And so by middle of last year, we had Teams, Planner, and Stream out during COVID, which really allowed the department to function. Once we moved out of BCP, we continuously iterated on that. And we are today, having recently launched forms, transcriptions. We are trying to finish the last 3 pieces for a migration, as well as to start to familiarize the department with the Delve tool now before we really see a major uptake in SharePoint use. It is quite a powerful tool, and so we're working with security and privacy in terms of how to launch this in a way that it improves and we manage behaviors in the department from an information management perspective. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in terms of the correspondence workflow tool and the in-house migration tool. Following our launch and success with SharePoint, we're going to continue to build on the Power BI capability we already have and start looking at and fuller adoption of Flow, the Power Apps suite, and the various tools within it. For anyone who's started to look at white papers, there's hundreds of them. We are a small team, so we're doing what we can. The first test case for a Power App for us, we've selected as the GC Docs correspondence workflow tool replacement, a recent decision. So You'll see we're really getting pushed into Q4. A lot of that has to do with we're doing things for the first time and pathfinding on these. We learn a lot, so I'll share a few lessons on those today. So this is what our real focus is on right now. It's fairly complex, and there are 3 pieces of it that specifically we are architecting and or conceiving, working with IT security, privacy, our infrastructure team, the Azure team, rights management. The first is the GC docs holding. There are 9 terabytes of really well organized information in our GC docs that we'd like to see next day, or at least to the user perspective, in their SharePoint repositories. We have met with every sector in the department multiple times. There's a real excitement for this. When we show them their SharePoint, they can see themselves in it. You know, you can build it in almost real time. So it's been quite an interesting architecture exercise, unlike the sort of Excel hierarchy exercise if you've ever worked on RDIMS or GC docs migrations. The second's around the correspondence workflow replacement. Very early days on that. We have preliminary concept architecture and still unpacking that. Our team has been diverted to other activities, so we haven't made a significant progress since that decision has been made. And then finally, the minister's office. As you know, anyone in the IAM world knows, we definitely need a very clear separation and segregation of ministerial information. Tools like Delve and things like that, e-discovery, etc. We really need to configure them right. There is no Microsoft tool that's really designed for this type of segregation. It's either all or nothing with info barriers. So we're looking to build a concept that meets our IT security and information management expectations that will allow us to set up our 2 ministers' office to have a full Teams experience and potentially SharePoint. Obviously, continued change management. We've continued to get requests to collaborate with other government departments and external collaboration on the business of TBS. And for most of you who've been onboarded to date or haven't yet, the GC Exchange project will play a role in that. So what's the distinction between the two needs to be finalized. And then we need a migration strategy for our shared drives. SharePoint is a shared drive, so we don't necessarily need to keep those and don't want to. So hopefully we can move on from there. So I keep referring to us as a pathfinder. We have gone to GCR prior to my arrival to brief this plan. We're working very closely with the OCIO's office to feedback our lessons learned. We've been invited back to GCR in the near term to talk about where we're at. So you're getting a bit of a preview on some of the items that we're going to be sharing with them. You know, there is a review on the IAM policy going on, so hopefully our lessons learned will inform that. And also, you know, a really strong migration this approach may not work for everyone. I know PSPC, CVSA, and a number of other departments have all alluded to maintaining their GC docs and looking at other ways to integrate with it. I think there is no one size fits all on IAM. The accountability resides with the deputy. So this worked well for us. I think there's a few reasons it worked well for us. You know, we have uniformity across our IT equipment. We've worked really hard to eliminate debt, to really be a lean and mean in terms of our applications, our tool sets, and activities. We have a really strong governance approach to this. You know, we didn't want to adopt SharePoint without having strong governance around it and avoid group sprawl. Some of the lessons learned that were shared with us early in the vision. And we don't have an on-prem SharePoint, so our migration strategy is, to an extent, somewhat clean, moving from one really strong adoption of GC docs, as Paul alluded to, some of the best IAM practices I've certainly ever seen in government, to you know, a new tool set with those strong IAM or healthy IAM practices in place. You know, we've been early out of the gate with Exchange Online, and certainly user adoption has been accelerated thanks to COVID. Very different change management story when I talk to Exco these days. You know, ultimately we made early investments for the add-ons and E5 that added and increased the security, as well as some of the tools available to close some of the EDRMS requirements that SharePoint alone don't satisfy or E3 alone don't satisfy. And so when we speak to our clients and our customers or our partners within Treasury Board, those are really the 6 reasons we are looking at SharePoint. Paul talked about cost. That is a big one. Also the integration. Some of the out-of-the-box integrations are just there. They don't require a lot of architecture on our part. And so there's some real inherent benefits. I put those up there in case you're looking at your IM and M365 journeys and they're useful to you in any way. But SharePoint change management really just starts with the centralization of information. That's when we talk about launching SharePoint, that's kind of the start and end we're looking to achieve by Q4. There's a whole hockey stick of next steps. It even looks like a staircase. We met with our ATIP team this week to talk about road mapping some of their needs into the longer term SharePoint change management strategy and continuously delivering change and improvements incrementally all the way out to, so the conversations we are having around metadata, but we were also talking about learning and tools in terms of making their jobs more efficient. So all those will be to come, and we'll have a continuous roadmap for SharePoint as a consequence. So that centralization of information, our first step in that, the outcomes we're looking for is obviously content in both official languages for our entire SharePoint environment, departmental document terms defined, users and permissions defined, document migration from GC Docs, and record keeping and operational requirements are defined as of day 1 to go forward. And, interestingly, I'll show you a little bit of what our exact sector engagements look like on the next slide. But interestingly, we kind of conceived of 4 buckets of things where our information or hub sites. SharePoint has a different ways that you can configure sites, but these are specifically hub sites. And there are 4. And so far, despite all the engagement with 2,800 people or their representatives, we've kept to the 4 hub sites. We've made a few tweaks to the titles and things like that, but ultimately we're set on having 4 sites. Every user will navigate through these 4 sites, the breadcrumbs, not too dissimilar. And the first is sort of TBS facing information, anything that's open by default, anyone should be able to access. The goal would be to have our intranet there in the long term. We'll see that as about a year-long project with our communications colleagues. Sector space, so that's more traditionally like where your hierarchy sector manages this information. The internal services space, that's where even IT would have a relationship with other sectors, and then ultimately that PAN collaboration space between 2 or more sectors within the department. Eventually, we'll have to conceive what that external collaboration may look like as we move to it. It's not currently part of our internal IA. So we phased out into 3 phases our information architecture engagements with sectors. The first was high level, meet with them, explain to them what we were doing, identify activities, business lines, make sure our list had everyone we needed to touch base with. Ask them kind of what's the sensitive material, collaboration requirements, and if there are top 3 wishes that they might have or business items they would like corrected within their IM space. And so it became a real way to engage with folks. Some of them have been backlogged if they have interesting requirements like external collaboration with provinces or something like that. We then took all that information and actually built their draft environment in SharePoint, and then re-met with them and gave them the keys for a couple days as a UAT. And inside the SharePoint itself was a way to log their issues or their UAT questions or comments. And then we followed up with clients to get a sign off in principle. It's gone extremely well. I participated in the one with our secretary's office recently, or the first kickoff. We had scheduled them kind of last once the whole architecture was there, so we were able to communicate what had happened, and it went superbly well. Everyone's really kind of very interested in this and what it can do for them. Obviously a complex relationship to manage from an information standpoint between the departmental assistants and the minister's office, so more engagement to come, but good progress so far. So that's kind of what it looks like. This is our, Paul, this is your CSS hub, or Karen's CSS hub, and through it, You see at the top of the screen the hub site on the left for the sector, internal services, and they'll be customized or tailored based on what you're in.
Danielle, I believe your internet has cut out if you wanted to turn off of your camera.
I got lost for a minute, didn't I?
Just for a quick minute, yeah. Just for a quick minute, yeah.
So I'll just shut off my video there, and
Yeah.
Is my presentation come back up, or do I need to reshare again?
Presentation's good.
Good. Okay. So I think I'm almost done. So that's positive. So finally, I did want to share today just a little sneak peek of what we're looking at from our Minnow team. I mentioned that as well. So for any of you that are grappling with this, it's not finalized yet, but it's one of the, forgive me, the sort of, it's not quite an architecture, but it's the challenge that we faced. We'd like to make sure that the minister's office, in the little green box with the check mark, the minister's office is able to call, have video calls, make invites and chat with people within the department and TBS staff. But we don't want them to be able to see documents, information, and share directly, which is the kind of no-nos in the red box, with which is a bit of a unique requirement in M365. And so we're building an Azure Rights Management approach that'll use a separate label for ministers' offices and TBS groups. And then we will restrict, using encryption, access to the Minnow documents, and then work on the compliance boundary sets with eDiscovery. To get to this point, we thought we'd be able to use compliance boundaries alone. We followed all the Microsoft documentation. However, it didn't play out as we had hoped. There was a lot of back and forth with Microsoft on it. So I guess one lesson's learned, and we've learned this on the GC docs as well. The Microsoft documentation doesn't always work the way that it's intended to. So if you are going down the road to customize and architect various things within this domain, certainly keep in touch with Microsoft. If you have Premier licenses, I recommend you use them, and also validate some of the documentation before you start building it, because there's a few times we've built it exactly as Microsoft has recommended in their docs, and then it turned out it didn't work the way it was supposed to. So that's one kind of lesson learned we want to share with you. We lost a few months kind of trying to make the compliance boundaries work, and in the end it fixed it, but it then did not eliminate. We went back and forth about 4 or 5 times to get the technically to work, and then in the end it didn't actually restrict things the way we needed it to. And didn't eliminate enough of the risk of possible sharing of information. So there's a lesson for everyone. And then finally, just if you have any questions, comments, I wanted to leave enough time for that to happen. Similar to on the GC docs side, we have a bit of an architecture we'll be sharing as it gets better defined. We're learning, we're testing it. It's in its first UAT right now, and we're running into some challenges, so we need to work with our dev team to get over those. So I'm not prepared to show an architecture just yet and how we're doing it, but when we do have it figured out, I'm sure you'll be all the first to know. So I think that's it from a presentation standpoint. Silvana, so I can open the floor if we'd like. I can end the show. Is that kind of how you want to run this?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, why don't you stop sharing your screen? You can hear me, and you'll probably turn your camera off again. Just, I know you're a little bit choppy there, just at the very end. Can you hear me, Danielle?
My camera's still off. Yeah, hear you.
Perfect. So yes, that was a fantastic presentation. I think just detailed enough. I know you could probably talk about this for days. and days, but it definitely gives us a great summary of where you're at and where you've come from since the last time Treasury Board presented to the council meeting several months ago. We've had quite a few questions come in. Everyone in the audience, the question box is still open, so feel free to put your questions into the box and we'll get to as many questions as we can. I know that Joel Martin, Chief IM Officer at Treasury Board, is also in the chat answering some questions, and I'm sure he'll come off mute as well to assist with these. Just in case people are not in the question box, I'm going to ask a couple of the ones even that have written answers, just so that we can start an open conversation. It might prompt some other questions coming in. So is Treasury Board using both GC Docs and SharePoint for their EDRMS? I know you touched on this briefly, Danielle, and I know, Joel, you're responding, but maybe we want to just dive a little bit deeper into that.
So our current official approved EDRMS for Treasury Board is GC Docs. We are pathfinding a way for the eventual transfer of GC Docs to a SharePoint EDRMS. That's the plan.
Just to add to that. Yeah, just to add to that, we will only have one EDMRS. Right now it's GC Docs. Like Danielle said, hopefully by Q4 of this fiscal, it's fully transitioned to SharePoint. We just couldn't afford to have multiple ones, and nor did I think it's necessary. So we are transitioning to SharePoint.
Thank you, Paul. Another question, moving to an agile methodology, how did you change expectations regarding artifacts and monitoring?
I can take a little stab at that, Paul, but you certainly probably have something to add. So in terms of the project management policy, it isn't well articulated a path for agile. There's still all of the documentation artifact requirements. Notwithstanding, we've worked with our DPMO, or our project management office, and a CFO team to look at a way that we can kind of fast track projects under a certain threshold with a communicated gating plan that articulates a little more reliance on the senior designated official from the project management framework. It's still the first round of documents that we're filling in, so I'm filling them in right now for our priority project just to see, and I'm seeing still the templates of having lots of duplication and repeating ourselves quite a bit, and so I do see room for a unique template for small agile projects. For the larger ones, agile doesn't eliminate the need for governance and good project management practices. Articulating your business case, articulating your investment proposal, etc., are still required and should be well documented for audit and historical purposes. However, there are some projects where governance can be slow, and so slow that it doesn't actually meet the needs, and we'd rather not cut corners. We'd rather make sure we are doing things by the book, but without losing any momentum on our project. So that covers it off, Paul. We're early days on that accelerated governance in terms of working around it, but the PMF exists and we still need to manage our requirements under it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I would characterize our adoption of Agile as being more the adoption of Wagile, so a combination of waterfall and Agile. Like Danielle said, we still require kind of a governance model on top of our investments to make sure that we're investing in the right areas and that it's a worthwhile investment, and that at project closeout we did accomplish the outcomes that we sought early in the early days of the project. So with that in mind, we certainly go to our higher level governance at gate 1. I got an idea. Here's the idea, and gate 2, 3 in terms of a little more refinement in terms of requirements and how long it's going to take, etc. And then really between gate 3 and gate 7, we're iterating. So it's in that period that we're leveraging a lot of the agile principles, etc. We actually, trained not only our IT organization in terms of the use of agile, but we've also commingled our business partners on that same training so that you actually start sprinting during those training sessions and beyond. So it really was a big shift for not only us, but our business partners, and so far it's been extremely successful.
Great, thanks to both of you. Eric from CRA, what information sensitivity level and what approval process was used for forms, and in brackets, data residency challenge?
We've kept it to unclassified, so that was one way to address that. And I'm happy to share those, the documentation that we have on it, if you send me an email.
And the other thing, Danielle, do you just want to talk about the deployment of it?
Yeah, so sorry about that. We that's a good point, Paul. We have instituted, working with our privacy office and IT security, built a sort of mandatory training to get a license that requires you to think through the various privacy implications of data collection, where it's stored, etc., and how it'll be used and what conditions it should be used prior to creating a form. And when you are creating a form, it recommends that you have it approved through your director as well. So I can share, that's what I meant by sharing the documentation. There is a thought process around protecting potential risks to using the software.
Great, and on the same topic of forms, can the actual forms themselves, the Microsoft forms or surveys, be shared outside of TBS for external surveying?
My understanding is yes.
All right. Back to the GC Docs and M365. How was that discussion internally had to make the decision to eventually move to M365 solely, as Paul, you just shared?
Well, I'm going to have to defer to you, Paul and Joel. It predates me to an extent, but I think there was a GCR presentation in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, it started way before that. With our adoption of M365, it became apparent that we had a couple of choices. Number one, we could keep GC Docs as our document repository and have an interface between M365 and GC Docs. Like I stated earlier, that would require really 3 pieces of software. It would require M365, GC Docs, and whatever's in the middle to combine the two. And we just didn't have the scale to be able to do that. Number one, make sure that all 3 versions of those software can constantly communicate, because as you know, these platforms are constantly evolving with patches, with new features, etc. So you'd need to keep all 3 of those working together, and as soon as one goes out, essentially they're all out, which was problematic from my perspective. In addition to that, it would require resources to be trained up on all 3, at least IT resources to be trained up on all 3, and to a certain degree, business resources to be trained up on the 2, GC Docs and M365. So, all that, and plus we own the licenses for M365. And we own licenses for GC Docs, and continuing to pay for both as well didn't make a whole lot of sense. So that's when we, and I know other departments are on different tracks, and that's great for them and probably makes sense for their business, but it just didn't make sense for us. So whenever we started looking at it from that perspective, we decided, what, M365, we're going to fully adopt the suite. And we felt that it was close enough to meeting our requirements as a department that we could actually replace GC Docs with a singular kind of suite approach.
Thank you. So follow up to that, are you expected to return to GCARB once you've completed the project? And do you know if GCARB is expecting every other department to obtain this approval to use M365 as the EDRMS?
Well, we are going to GCARB. I think is it next month, Danielle?
21st of October. They've invited us to come back and share where we are with our journey. I think there's another department on the schedule at the same time on a similar subject. I think the expectation is they'll want to know in terms of transition. I don't want to speak on behalf of my GCARB colleagues in terms of what their intentions are or not, as well as OCIO. The policy on EDRMS is under review, as well as email management right now. Certainly, our work can easily, and I think reasonably, contribute to decision making in that space or recommendations or various paths forward, but we're not going to preempt that work. We're just going to continue pathfinding in this way, and hopefully it can inform those discussions. And I'm not sure how GCARB wants to handle EDRMS compliance, or if they even see that as part of their mandate. I'm not sure. I think the OCIO team will be providing guidance on that.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is, from a policy perspective, as Danielle rightly pointed out, I think our OCIO colleagues are looking at potentially changing the policies because they are, in today's world, very prescriptive in terms of the technologies. But I think the notion is to change that to be more outcomes-based versus prescribing technologies. But that is really their bailiwick to determine, the timing and whether in fact that makes sense for the GC.
Great, thank you. Changing directions a little bit. What was the size of the Treasury Board implementation team, and what are some of the key roles you have? What are your advice on some of the key roles?
Do you want me to take that one, Paul? Tiny. I don't know if I'd use this as a benchmark. So we really made the decision early on, this predates me, of making the business owner IM and work with them to lead the transformation. Certainly you need a product owner, so someone who can manage that. We had a head of change management, has been critical. Some technical skills for SharePoint and knowledge of that, and a project manager for the project were our key, I want to say, trifecta of roles. And they worked very closely with our infrastructure team that had done the cloud. And they were, I want to say, each supported by a handful of people. So the team has been under 12 people at all times during the project, and they also manage their day-to-day IM change management work. This has very much been, a well-supported project. We relied on some external resources, and it was very much matrixed across our organization. I've looked at some other sort of structures where there's sort of a head of collaboration tools as a manager, and they have a number of different streams, including an M365 team that includes some of the Azure and group management. That the Azure management and those pieces have stayed with our infrastructure team. So a bit of a hybrid across Paul's team to deliver on this. So I don't know, hopefully that answers the question. It wasn't sort of a fully stood up team in the way that some people have stood up their M365 teams, especially in light of COVID, having not already started down this path. Anything to add, Joel, on that one? In terms of the team?
I don't think so, unless there are follow-up questions after what you said. I think you covered it fairly well.
Was your information architecture finalized prior to starting the project?
Well, if you think about the overall digital workspace renewal, definitely not. If you think about the first meetings we have with our clients, nope. The concept around the architecture, I think, had been devised, the 4 buckets. But no, we went reusing the things from GC Docs to meet with clients and saw it as being iterative. What had been largely decided was what we would allow and not allow, how we wanted to configure SharePoint, how we wanted to, I want to say, lock it down, but I'm sure Joel has a more eloquent way to put that, but the sort of policies we wanted in place and how we wanted to make sure that it maintained the same type of rigor that GC Docs does while still enabling quite a bit of flexibility.
So maybe
you know, the idea.
So
Go
maybe
ahead, sorry, Paul.
Before Joel jumps in, I'll just jump in with my little anecdote here. So, you know, obviously, whenever we had EDRMS, we had an IA. Whenever we transitioned to GC Docs, we actually redesigned the information architecture. However, our GC Docs implementation and the way it ultimately kind of proceeded over time was that it was a very, very complicated IA with, in some cases, 27 levels deep to find stuff. And I've all, you know, I'm a very simple person. You know, IM is all about, from my perspective, number one, you've got something of business value that you need to save. Do you know where to save it? And if you have to, you know, go through 27 different hierarchies to figure out where to save it, I'm sorry, even as being the IMSO, I don't know where to save stuff. So I depend on my EA to do it. And that's similar across the GC. So, you know, that wasn't working for us. The second part of IM I always think of is, you know, you're somebody that wants to reuse information that somebody else has developed. So you got to be able to find it. And if you can't find it, your IA or your systems aren't working for you either. And the last piece is disposition, so that you know, keep a clean set of records, et cetera, and you dispose of things as necessary. So our GC Docs, and it has nothing to do with GC Docs per se, our IA associated with GC Docs was not working for the organization. As such, we decided to redesign the IA with our business clients to simplify it. And that's the work that's really been occurring over the last, Danielle, probably year, working with each of the sectors to come up with something that's more simplistic, yet meets their needs. Joel, do you have any, or Danielle, do you have any more color to add to that?
Nope. I just also like that it's not so hierarchy based, because I think the experience or anecdote I heard was, you know, by the time all the IA work was done on GC Docs, we had, you know, there's already changes being requested. And so I think just the M365 tool set demands quite a different approach to information management and classification. So we're starting to work on e-discovery and how that will work, getting our folks trained up and things like that, how it will look. No, it certainly has been more of a journey than a decision. We relied on validation as much as possible, so that we weren't asking people to go back to the drawing board. Was something we'd recommend. Joel, anything to add?
I think just that this is an area where we're really innovating a lot in our IM space, where we're taking a very user-centric approach, with the intent that the easier it is for them to use and to use correctly, the more compliant we are going to be with our records keeping requirements. And that seems to be proving out, like Danielle mentioned earlier. Not an awful lot has changed in our strategy and our plan for designing this information architecture from our early presentations here. And we have, for the first time ever, had pretty much a unanimous positive response from clients on what we're bringing forward and on the collaborative approach to design. We have a number of other sort of guiding principles that we try to enforce, which we've shared before and we're happy to share moving forward, but it's been a really positive piece of this project.
Thank you. In terms of retention and disposition of records, are you applying this only within SharePoint Online, or does it extend to other M365 applications like OneDrive, Planner, etc.?
For the details, I might have to defer to Joel. I do know on our Teams sites we've considered disposition, but for that kind of detailed question, I think I might defer to you, Joel.
No problem. So we're managing information in place anywhere that we're able to. So that includes OneDrive, it includes Exchange Online mailboxes, it includes Teams, it includes SharePoint, it includes some aspects of videos and or transcripts from Stream now that the new Experiences Stream is starting to roll out. More of that will come into our capability to manage moving forward. Other aspects like Planner and a couple of the other apps don't necessarily have the same hooks directly, but that is kind of an ongoing and changing scope at Microsoft. They continue to add more and more capability to manage information in more and more locations within M365, and that's one of the strong points for us of looking at M365 as an EDRMS, is that we can manage a lot more of our information across the enterprise than we can in more traditional EDRMS systems.
Great. Well, as expected, your presentation, Danielle and Paul, Joel, stirred up a lot of questions. There's probably 16 or 18 questions that I haven't been able to get to just because of time. We are coming up to 2 o'clock. Danielle, is there a way that people can reach out with follow-ups if their question didn't get answered?
Yeah, we're a bit busy, but we're also going to be doing sort of an IM panel, but certainly if you could send all of your questions to me, I'll try and put them all together and maybe answer them all at once and reply to everyone all at once. That would be my preferred approach. I may even see if I can't put a GC Exchange kind of site up with a Q&A. I'll have to experiment a little bit and encourage more folks here to join up to GC Exchange. You don't have to be rolled out to your department. So hopefully I can do that. And I know certainly I committed to giving some of the details on how we rolled out forms. So yeah, happy to do that, as timely as I can.
Thank you, Danielle. And that would be interesting to be able to use GC Exchange. I know Chris Jaja was on not too long ago presenting to the group, I believe in June, about GC Exchange and all the great updates there. So I want to end it at that. I want to thank the three of you so much for coming on again, kicking off the season 4 of our M365 Council meetings. So exciting to be back. And we do not have a department lined up for October quite yet. You will receive an email in your inbox shortly with more details on our October session. As always, if you or someone in your department would like to present at our council meeting, please reach out to the Orangutech team to let us know, and we'll definitely chat about getting you on the roster for this season. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye, guys. Talk soon.
Thanks for your time, everybody.